This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the relationship between your free chlorine level and the cyanuric acid level. Some of this information came from Bob Lowry, but you'll be surprised in some cases to find that most of this actually originated from the Trouble-Free Pool Forum, and I'll explain and touch on that in today's podcast. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. So there's a lot of research that will kind of state that the free chlorine level should be a certain percentage of the pool cyanuric acid level. Now, Bob Lowry talked about this a lot, and he has it in his residential books, his 7.5 number, but he wasn't actually the originator of this concept. Actually, it came from Trouble-Free Pools, TFP, and a lot of this theory is from studies done in the 70s and 80s. Probably the best known study was in 1974, and this study was titled Equilibria in Aqueous Solutions of Chlorinated Isocyanate. But you can see that there's cyanuric acid in that title there. And this was published by J.E. O'Brien, J.C. Morris, and J.N. Butler. And this established a long time ago, the relationship between the chlorine in the pool, free chlorine I should say, and the level of cyanuric acid in the pool. I think in my generation, when I first started, there was a lot of talk about chlorine lock. And Bob Lowry kind of disproved this statement that the chlorine is locked up completely in cyanuric acid, which that is not true. It's not locked up. It just slows down the kill factor of the chlorine in the pool, the HOCl, which is the killing part of the chlorine that goes into the pool. So Trouble-Free Pools, of course, is a homeowner residential forum. There's a lot of pool pros in there also, and they created a chart. This was created by their founder, Ben Powell, and he did a lot of other research as well, and he created other online forums as well. And it's called Ben's Best Guess CYA chart. And the reason why it's called that is because it is kind of a guess of what the free chlorine level should be with the cyanuric acid level. Now, Bob Lowry is pretty stuck in that 7.5% formula, and Bob Lowry will also allow you to edit that number down to 5% if you have borates to 50 parts per million in a pool. Well, if you go to Trouble-Free Pools, there's a lot of course, research on this, and there's a lot of charts. You can actually see the chart that I speak of here, and it's actually interesting because they take Bob Lowry's 7.5, and they actually have a range of 7.5, but they take it a step further, and that 7.5 is actually the minimum according to their chart, and the ideal would be 11 or 12% roughly of the percentage. So if you wanted to take it a step further and use their information, it actually raises the bar a bit higher than what Bob Lowry would state. As an example, if you had a pool with 50 parts per million of cyanuric acid CYA level, and you times that by 7.5%, which is what Bob Lowry suggests you use, that means that you'd have to have a free chlorine level of about 4 parts per million in that pool for the chlorine to be effective, or the killing factor of the chlorine, the HOCl, to be effective. And that means that you'd have to have the free chlorine level at 5.5 parts per million. Not a huge difference, but a difference that is significant. And depending on which formula you're going to use, you're going to have to keep the free chlorine level at that level. Now, I'm not splitting hairs, but there's research for this to be accurate, and there's research that, of course, means that we're just guessing in a way, and that's why the chart is called that. In a way, it's just basically something that was estimated to help you calculate the effectiveness of chlorine in a high cyanuric acid pool. For example, if your cyanuric acid level is 60 to 90 parts per million, the minimum free chlorine would be 5, and then the maximum would be 10 parts per million. If you're going to shock these pools, this also affects the cyanuric acid level, also affects how effective the shock is, or the shocking of the pool is. And this makes perfect sense if you just kind of think about it for a minute. Now, in the industry, we kind of just go off of, these numbers of bringing to 30 parts per million, or 40 parts per million, or 50 parts per million. But there is some science behind this as well. And it's not something that you can just take lightly, and it's not something that hasn't been analyzed. A lot of times we just kind of use rules of thumbs out there that we've learned. But if you wanted to see their chart, you can look it up. It's the free chlorine cyanuric chart, and it's basically, if you just Google, you can find it online just about anywhere. They're all their literature about it. But let's just say the cyanuric acid level is at 50 parts per million. Of course, you're going to have to keep the free chlorine level at a certain level, and then the slam level for that would be 20 parts per million in a pool at 50 parts per million. If you jump up to 100 parts per million, of course, that slam level pretty much doubles to 39 or 40, and this is your target for that. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. So what does all this mean to you out there doing pool service or trying to maintain your pool? It means that the cyanuric acid level is a major factor in your pool care. And I'll say that again. The cyanuric acid level is a major factor in your pool care, and you can't discount that. Now, I've heard many times I'm getting my supplies, someone walk in and say, man, I have a pool and it's got some seriously chlorine-resistant algae. And sometimes the guy behind the counter will agree and say, yeah, that's going around right now. I hear that there's lots of algae that's chlorine-resistant. Now, that is not a true statement. The chlorine is actually not resistant. The algae is actually not resistant to the chlorine, I should say. It's the fact that the chlorine you're adding is not at an effective level to kill the algae. Because if you use that formula, and this is where it gets interesting, it kind of hurts your head a little bit out there in the field. Let's say you have a pool, you do the cyanuric acid reading, it comes out at 150 parts per million, which, by the way, anything over like 80 parts per million starts to get really hard to gauge the actual cyanuric acid level. So you may do a dilution test and you're getting 150, but it could be 180. It's not the most accurate thing once it gets over a certain part per million. So let's just say 150 for sake of argument. So if you're at 150 parts per million, and if you're using Bob Lowry's formula 7.5, which is the minimum, by the way, for the trouble-free pool formula, you need to keep 11 parts per million of free chlorine in that pool for the chlorine to be effective. But then if you're trying to get rid of the mustard algae and bringing it up to a shock level, you're going to have to add a lot more chlorine and have a higher part per million than you think. A lot of us default at 20 parts per million. That should be enough to clear the algae and shock the pool. In reality, that 20 parts per million is much lower than is necessary with a pool with cyanuric acid level at 150 parts per million. You're actually going to need to bring the chlorine level up to 60 parts per million. It seems like a lot, And I'll just give you a quick rundown of what that looks like in an average pool. So you're not just like, losing your mind here, but it is a lot of chlorine, but it's not a ton of chlorine, if that makes sense. So let's just say you have a 15,000 gallon pool, which is an average sized pool in my area, and you test the chlorine as 0. There's mustard algae in there, and you brush it and you want to treat it. You want to shock the pool now to clear the algae. And if you bring it to 20 parts per million with 12.5% liquid chlorine, that requires about 2 gallons and 1 quart. So a little bit over 2 gallons and a quart of liquid chlorine to bring it from 0 to 20 parts per million. But according to this chart here, if you wanted to slam the pool and break the algae, because it's a pretty big outbreak, the whole deep end is covered in it, the walls are covered in it, and you want to clear this algae up. And again, it's not chlorine resistant algae, it's just that you have to raise the chlorine level up to a point that makes it effective with the higher cyanuric acid level in the pool. And so you're going to actually have to bring it to 60 parts per million, which means you're going to have to add about 7 gallons of liquid chlorine to that pool to bring it to 60 parts per million to really treat the algae in that pool if the cyanuric acid is at 150. And this is where it gets crazy, because you're adding chlorine to like 30 parts per million and the algae is not going away. And that's due in part to the fact that you just aren't adding enough chlorine to the pool when you're doing the shock process or the slam process to the pool. Interesting if you think about it. And a lot of times when you're shocking the pool, you're just not adding enough chlorine. Now, my generation, we always err on the side of caution, and we always think more is better. And so a lot of us will bring the pool to 50 parts per million just as a habit. And that's what I do whenever I'm shocking the pool. And so I'm not too far from the 60 parts per million here. So it may be pretty effective at that point. I don't think a lot of people are shocking properly with the right amount of chemicals based on the cyanuric acid level in the pool, nor are they maintaining the free chlorine level at the proper level based on a cyanuric acid in the pool. And this is a great resource for you to go to and find it. Go to Trouble Free Pools and just, Google free chlorine and cyanuric acid, and you'll see all these charts pop up. And it's pretty interesting to see that Bob Lowry, of course, believed this as well, but his formula was on the low end of things, and they're more or less on the high end of things at 11% versus your free chlorine level, the cyanuric acid level in the pool. Another very interesting concept to get out of this is that having a cyanuric acid level of 100 or greater is detrimental to your pool care or the ability to care for these pools properly without just having a crazy high free chlorine level in the pool. So if you can get the cyanuric acid down to about 80 parts per million on your pool route, you're going to have a much better chance of balancing the pool and keeping it safe to swim in. If you are at 80 parts per million, then the minimum of 7.5% would be 6 parts per million, and then the higher end of that would be 9 parts per million. And this, again, is a daily free chlorine level to make sure the pool doesn't develop algae or that the bathers don't get sick, because the HOCl level that is affected by the higher cyanuric acid level in the pool. And these are all things that I talk about all the time, and Bob Lowry talked about. You can read about it in his books, the 7.5% formula. And I think you really have to buy into it in order to take care of the pools properly and maintain a free chlorine level where you're not fighting algae all the time. One of the biggest things that slows you down out there is brushing pools for algae. Shocking the pools is really a big waste of chemicals or money on your end, because you're adding a lot of chemicals, algicides, whatever you're doing to try to keep the pool from getting algae. And you're kind of just going in a big circle, because what happens when you get an algae bloom, the water quality drops, the filter struggles, and then you have to maybe clean the filter. But it's like a vicious cycle with algae in the pool, because you're adding a lot of chemicals. The dead algae is going into the filter in some respects, causing the PSI to rise in it, causing the water flow to not be as good as prior to algae, causing maybe more algae to form because the water is not flowing well and the filter is getting dirty. And this becomes a vicious cycle that only gets worse if you don't take care of the algae right away and really understand the relationship between the cyanuric acid level and even the shock level that you're trying to bring the pool to clear the algae out of that pool. Now, of course, you can't tell this to the customer and stand there and explain this to them. they just won't get it. But what you can tell the customer is that the water quality and the fact that the chlorine is not as effective in the pool is affected by the high cyanuric acid. And so you need to drain 1 or 2 feet out of the pool. It's hard to convince a customer to drain the pool entirely. Sometimes, they'll give you a green light for that. Sometimes they won't. But draining partially is a key that you can use in your service business. And when I tell a customer I have to drain 8 inches or a foot of water out, I don't get a lot of pushback. They're like, yeah, that's not a problem. You can drain a foot and that's not a problem. Or drain 2 feet. When you get to like draining half the pool, some people are okay with that. Others aren't. A full drain is like, you just committed, a environmental sin there. But water is still not that expensive in my area. And I drain my pool ever so often. And I know my water bill goes up by maybe $130 when I refill it. So it's not something that's going to kill their budget, and it's not going to have like the environmental police knocking on their door. It's just something that needs to be done with regular pool care, especially if the cyanuric acid level gets to a point where you're using a lot more chlorine to keep that pool balanced. It really is not good for the customer, and it's definitely not good for you as a pool service provider fighting against algae in the pool and trying to keep that level at a constant high free chlorine level. And then I'll touch on certain enhancers you can use in the pool. Now, trouble-free pools definitely recommends borates at 50 parts per million. They're not too jazzed about Pool RX or the mineral technologies and the phosphate and enzyme treatments. I guess, the borates are number one in their book. And I would say that borates at 50 parts per million is one of the easier enhancers you can use, and it's something that's easy to add to the pool using boric acid powder if you can find it locally in your area. But I don't discount the Pool RX mineral technology. I think it's a great, easy way to add an enhancer to the pool as well, and it's highly effective in preventing algae. And even in high cyanuric acid situations, it works really effectively, and it's something that you can consider if you're fighting algae to use either borates at 50 parts per million or the Pool RX. Using an enzyme phosphate 1-2 punch is also really effective. I spent a year just using phosphate remover and enzymes on my pool route just to test it out. I didn't use Pool RX or borates. Of course, I had borate pools already, so those were kind of excluded from my test. But using phosphate and enzymes, I would just buy a bottle, leave it at my stop, and I would add it every week. It was really effective in reducing the algae outbreaks and keeping the chlorine much more effective in the pools. So these three are definitely interchangeable. Now, of course, you could maybe not overkill if you use all three in a pool. That's going to be highly effective as well, but it's probably not necessary, and you're just probably wasting, money and resources at that point. But having these enhancers does help with these numbers. Now, I'm not sure, there's probably no study done on that 5% number being effective with Pool RX or enzymes and phosphates. But Bob Lowry was pretty sure of it with borates at 50 parts per million, that you can take that formula down a notch, which means that if you're using the 11% from trouble-free pools, you could probably bring that down to the minimum of 7.5%. And with the enhancers, you can use less chlorine. Basically, the bottom line, with the proper enhancer in the pool, you can use less chlorine. And ultimately, with a lower cyanuric acid level in the pool, and this is the key, with a lower cyanuric acid in the pool, you can keep a lower free chlorine level, and you may not even need these enhancers to begin with if the cyanuric acid level is in range in your pool. But the enhancers are kind of like an insurance policy, and it's one of those things that I like to use because they just make the pool much easier to care for. But research it yourself, and you can see all the different literature about the 7.5 to 11% of free chlorine to cyanuric acid. I'm going to stick with the 7.5% because I think even though that's the minimum with some of these charts, I still think that's an effective level that I've tested pools at, and it's been effective for me out there. And it's really interesting to read these articles and read the studies about it. And if you want to nerd out on it, you can spend all day reading these different studies. But just for a simple way of breaking it down, the cyanuric acid level does affect how effective the free chlorine is in the pool. and keeping those within range of each other is an effective way to prevent algae in the pool and make the pool safe to swim in and swim ready every week. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Every Monday through Friday, I drop one there. And also on my website, there's a podcast icon with over 1,700 podcasts that you can download. If you're interested in a coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at Pool Guy Coaching. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.